Good morning, it's David Worrell, and you are joining 5 Minutes for Finance, where we're going to take 5 minutes and learn something really cool about small business finance. And today we're going to talk about modeling. I've talked about modeling before, but typically when I talk about modeling, it's with Excel. And I may have told you how excruciatingly painful that can be. I allocate 10, 20, 30 hours for the basic model for most startup businesses, most early stage companies. Even later stage, you want me to do FP&A, financial planning and analysis. An Excel model can take hours and hours and hours. Well, today I'm going to solve that problem for you guys with my friend Laszlo Balassy.
Hello,
And
everyone.
Laszlo has started a company called ActiveGraf, and he's going to walk us through it and show us how cool it is and how it can save us hours and hours of FP&A, financial planning and analysis time, by playing what-if scenarios for us inside of his software. So, Laszlo, start by giving us just a quick introduction to yourself and how you got into this business.
Very good. Thank you for having me, first of all, and hello to everyone. Um, I am currently the CEO of ActiveGraf. I've spent most of my career as a banker, and that's actually how I came up with the idea for ActiveGraf. As you said to your audience, a lot of FP&A tasks and iterations are kind of repetitive and dull and slow, and I thought that's very strange. Why do we have more power in our cell phones than what took us to the moon, yet we can't do real-time scenario analysis, right? It's kind of weird. And I thought, okay, as I was a managing director at Citigroup doing internationally, mostly capital markets work. But, David, I think we all know that all of the smoke and mirrors, it all comes down to cash flow planning, right? At the end of the day, no matter if you're an investment banker, a hedge fund person, whatever it is, it all comes down to cash flow planning. And then I thought, there's a better way to do this. I thought, should we replace Excel? No, you can't do that. Should you work with Excel? Yeah, you can do that. And that's what we did. So many times, I don't know if you've done this, but in a meeting, you'll say, you'll be with the client, and I know you're a senior advisor to many, or a trusted advisor to many clients. And it says, well, okay, that's great. But what if the post-closing synergies and an acquisition are actually lower the cost synergies? What do we do?
Yeah.
And then you have a few choices, don't you? First, you can sit there going, okay, and try to give a
Which
thought.
lines in my spreadsheet do I have to delete to answer this question? Or what
Exactly.
variables do I have to turn to answer this question? And it's not just something as complex as post-merger integration strategies. It might be, what if I hire a new employee, or I rent that car instead of buy it, or what if I move to a larger office, right? Simple, everyday.
Absolutely right.
What if my cost per click goes up to $5 per click?
We just did one of those. We just did one of the exactly right. And I chose that example just because I was talking about investment banking, but you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. It's
yeah,
any calculation that has a few variables in it.
yeah.
And when you're in a meeting like that, you can try to BS your way through a little bit and say, oh, I think it'd be about, that's always dangerous. Or you can say, well, give me the rest of the assumptions and we'll run away and run that scenario and we'll come back to you. And then, next week becomes 2 weeks from now, becomes 3 weeks from now, and so on. And with ActiveGraf, all you do is write within your dashboards and presentations, you click that assumption chart, you drag it, and immediately it refreshes, and it allows for a much more fluid dialogue. And it's really a kind of human-centered design take on FP&A and other things.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. With that, so that's really fascinating, Laszlo, to use Excel, but to augment it with something. Does it tie? Talk to me about the architecture of ActiveGraf real quickly. Does it tie to
Yeah,
QuickBooks, or does it tie to something else, or is it tying
it
the
does.
user more closely to the model?
Yeah, what we did was we established ActiveGraf as a standalone application, which essentially does one thing. It takes data, calculation engines, and that could be different ones, currently Excel or Python, and the visualizations, and those are bi-directionally synchronized in real time. In other words, any change in the data triggers a recalculation and freshens the chart. Any change in the chart changes the data and refreshes the calculation and brings back the results. And so it's kind of a synchronous, three-poled synchronous bidirectional hub. And the reason I say that is just so that we can sync into anything through Excel or Python, essentially. So however you get your data into Excel currently is the way the way it goes going forward with ActiveGraf. And the reason I say that is it's also emblematic of the way we think about it. It's very human centered. So we don't want to disrupt an existing workflow. Your workflow is exactly the same. The Excel charts that you make now, the ActiveGraf versions of them are easier to make, yet they can control the quant. And that's how to think about it.
That's very cool. So even though ActiveGraf doesn't directly pull data right out of QuickBooks, it sounds like it's going to be easy enough to make that happen somehow, perhaps by the, let me see if I can come up with the acronym, QBODBC.
You're much better at the acronyms than I am. So.
Yeah, right? QuickBooks something database connector, and the QBODBC actually connects Excel directly to QuickBooks. So just like when you're in QuickBooks and you can publish a report to Excel,
right? You can export it to Excel.
Yeah, this allows you to start in Excel and pull the data into Excel, which means you could use a P&L format and just update the numbers for January, or just
absolutely. And that is also true for I think it's also true for Sage, if anybody's in Sage and stuff. So the reason we chose it this way is, one, don't disrupt the existing thing. PowerPoint and Excel are what people use, for the most part. And the other thing is that already the data connections of Excel are so robust that any other ERP, accounting, or any other system will have had to contemplate its bridge to Excel. And that's the way ActiveGraf just layers on top of all that.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, can you switch to a share screen? And
absolutely.
That works with it. Okay, we're looking at ActiveGraf Live. This is living on your desktop, right, Laszlo?
That's right. And what you're seeing now is the publication interface, which allows you to send a URL, this URL to be specific, to anyone, and they can use the ActiveGraf without having to install anything, look at it through their browser on an iPad, tablet of any kind, anything. And this is the publisher part of it, which works as a URL. Cool. So this is a live board. It looks just like a traditional dashboard. On the top left, we have the P&L highlights, the CapEx, and so on. On the bottom left, we have some of the capital structure related things like the cost of equity and debt tenor. And then the working capital is on a separate tile. And on the right, we have kind of the operating profit, loss, and the IRR, NPV, and valuation. So this kind of brings everything together from a very macro, broad perspective. That would be a strategic dashboard, and it's cool to see. But these are ActiveGrafs, right? So they're even cooler than you might think. And one of the features of ActiveGraf is that they're easier than Excel charts to put together, yet they are bidirectional and include series filtering. In other words, David, you must have done this before, where you have, let's say, EBITDA and net profit together. And then you have essentially the same information, but instead of EBITDA, you're looking at operating profit and net profit together. Sure. And they're on different pages. With ActiveGraf, that's over. You just go in, you say toggle all, and any chart, this automatically happens. You don't have to separately set it up. You can just pick and let the conversation guide what you're showing, right? It saves a lot of time and publishing and so on. So it makes everything very fast for a CFO, especially, or a financial advisor. Just makes it much more fluid and easier to make an update. But that's not the coolest thing. The coolest thing is, let's say, David, you and I are on the board of this startup, and this is a startup, and we're like, all right, well, this top line growth for 5 years seems rather modest. And you and I decide that, look, if we're not above 200 million, this isn't really worth it in the 5th year, right?
And that's terrific. I've never seen anything do that. That's magic right there. That's what that was, Laszlo. I've never seen you be able to go into a graph and move the point to where you want it to be. That's amazing.
Glad you like it. I think it's a very quick and intuitive way. So we're trying to keep everything no BS and no highfalutin, just very direct. So for instance, you say, okay, yeah, but now you've changed it. Now what? Well, we can always go back. Undo once, undo all, redo, undo. That was what it was. And this is what our new plan is, right? So we tried to make it very as you would expect it. If we get there, I can also show you how the chart editing is the easiest chart editing in the world. When you go in and you try to format something, you click on what you want to change, and the menu changes to you. It doesn't say, hey, the third level of the menu through the help screen, you can find the dotted lines, and so you just click on it. So anyway, that's the kind of top level. And then here's the cool thing. You can continue to say, well, look, our CapEx is going to be way higher than the plan in the first year, but it will be lower in the plan consequently in the second year. Let's make that 10 million. And you can see everything is being adjusted live. You can also say, well, the CEO is thinking that 35% cost of equity is good. And you can do really cool things with your numbers that you wouldn't think to ask if it was in static charts or even think cells and Excels. You can do things like, you know what has a bigger impact on NPV and IRR? If I beat up on the bank to give us 2 years longer tenor for my client, or should I ask the client to work with their procurement team to make inventory less than 70 days? Because that's a lot. Let's say, should we try to envisage a 10-day leaner inventory? What has a bigger impact on IRR? With ActiveGraf, it's easy. Just go here. Oh, well, here is the inventory days. And here you see 52% IRR with that and 31.5 NPV. We undo it. And now we say, let's get the bankers to give us 2 years longer debt. So you'll see that the 2 years longer debt actually has a higher impact on your client's business and IRR.
Some of this is going to go right over the head of the average small business owner, right? This particular dashboard that you've picked out is pretty CFO-ish or pretty investment banker-ish to talk about things like IRR, internal rate of return, or NPV, net present value. Valuation is pretty neat. I mean, I think most business owners know what they're shooting for valuation, but I can imagine that a slightly different scenario would help a small business owner make much simpler decisions, right? I mean, the debt tenor is a really interesting one. If I am able to borrow money from the SBA at 7 years to buy that CapEx, right, to buy my capital expenditures of a new fleet of trucks or a new building or a new whatever, I can adjust my CapEx up if I buy a bigger building or down if I buy a smaller building, and I can change the debt tenor, which just means the term of the loan, from 7 years to 9 years if I get a different kind of SBA loan. And then I'm looking at
you make a very good point. I have to de-jargonize some of the stuff that I'm saying, because when you're in a bubble, you just think, oh, everybody knows that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And the CFO in me is geeking out over exactly what you're saying, but the CEO in me is going, now wait a minute, my needs are much simpler, and I just want to know, is my profit going to go up if I take a longer term debt? So you could slide that debt tenor out 15 years, and you could reduce your CapEx, and you can see what it does to your P&L. And it doesn't change revenue, of course, because we haven't asked it to change revenue. We just said, how are we going to finance this revenue? And you see that the operating income or operating profit is actually went up because we had less CapEx and therefore less depreciation, and maybe because the tenor was longer, we had less interest expense or something also, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
You highlight a very good point that I didn't mention yet. ActiveGrafs do not use templates. They can be layered onto any existing Excel and put into any existing PowerPoint. So when you mention that a business owner will have their own frame of reference, everybody can use ActiveGraf to great effect within their own frame of reference with their existing Excels. So it's a very, very straightforward thing. So exactly what your Excel calculates is what ActiveGraf will be able to calculate in a live board. And it does it at the same speed. So if your calculation is really long and it takes whatever time for Excel, in other words, even complex calculations can be done very quickly, because ActiveGraf only adds, I think we measured it 2 milliseconds onto the iteration time, or the update time, in other words. And so I think that's an interesting thing. Whatever level you're calculating, ActiveGraf can animate that in a very, very simple and straightforward way.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So let's see. I guess the next thing somebody's going to ask is, tell me how this fits in my organization. Roughly, what am I going to pay for it? And because it lives on my desktop, do I have to buy multiple seats or multiple licenses to get my CFO and my CEO in alignment so they can both play on the same model?
So the base scenario is that You have individual contributors are a little bit different because that is essentially people who are in teams of 5 or more are in a position where they should be using publisher and desktop. If somebody's an individual contributor, desktop is usually enough for them because they can kind of share that. And the desktop publisher combined, though, has such immense synergies because you can share the work with people that don't have ActiveGraf in a very
Yeah,
fluid way. So that's the pricing is contingent upon that.
sure.
Typically, you can say that a base of 5 each desktop license is $500 per seat per annum. In other words, it's very affordable, less than $50 a month. It's like
Yeah,
around
yeah,
$45 a month, and that's each desktop license. The publisher is scaled to be cost effective for whatever size of the organization. In other words, big corporations that we have, some big corporation clients, they will pay for each endpoint 100 up to $100 per endpoint for using publisher.
yeah,
But not to confuse the issue, if there's a CFO business or a small business that has 5 to 10 employees, they can expect to pay with publisher, they can expect to pay between $5,000 and $15,000 a year. If they're 5,000, if they're 5 to 10 employees, over 20 employees, it's 15. So we scale it to be cost effective for everyone.
yeah. Well, that's a big
Yeah.
jump from 500 a year for the desktop to 5,000 a year to be able to show people your work. So let's go back on that. I mean, I have 15 people in my company, right? But
Mm-hmm.
only 3 of us, maybe even only 2 of us, really are talking about these issues. The rest of them are doing customer facing work. So it's my internal
Yeah.
leadership team that I'm worried about seeing the results of a financial analysis like this. So I need one person who has it on their desktop, and I need 2 more people to be able to see this. And I
Mm-hmm.
see a save button up here. Does that mean that my leadership team, can say, "Hey, I want to see the thing with a 15-year debt term," and then I hit save, and something saves that they can reference and share back
Yes.
with me? Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
Okay. All
You
right,
can do
cool.
that.
So
There are various ways to save this, but I think it'd be long to get into that is in
yeah,
terms of
yeah,
all the variations there are.
sure.
So yeah, I think so I think for teams of like 5, the kind of beginning package for kind of corporate teams is 5 desktops, which is about $2,500. And then it's an additional for smaller teams like what you're describing, it's about $2,500 for the publisher piece. We try to scale it to be, a kind of cost effective solution. So there you would be talking about for the whole team, for you, everybody to use in your business, about a $400 a month type of thing. Yeah.
Not the cheapest solution, right? I mean, I've seen Sife and maybe Fathom's a little more expensive, but there are $10 a month solutions that do something kind of sort of similar. They take a spreadsheet, they put it on a website, they show you the results. They're not nearly this interactive, right? They're not ActiveGraf. They're not solving the what if problem. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just saying that if I'm going to have a $5,000 or $10,000 investment, I'm thinking that this might be better suited for a company that does a lot of analysis,
Mm-hmm.
that's got a complex financial life internally, or maybe a company like mine whose business is analysis.
Yeah,
So
that's correct.
I'm building a model for a new customer every week or month. I publish it out there, that customer can see at least the results of what I've done on a web page. Is that true?
Yeah, and I think that we can talk about the target markets for ActiveGraf, where the
Yeah.
ROI is huge, because
Yeah.
really what we're looking at is we typically get compared to other visualization tools that have a similar level of sophistication, although they're about descriptive analytics and we're more about kind of scenarios and what if analysis and going
Yeah.
forward. People typically compare to total cost of ownership of Tableau or Power BI, even
Right.
though it's different in nature. And we're less than half of that, of the cost of those. And so that's kind of the way we have been benchmarked in the past. I think when you look at the use cases where we focus, ActiveGraf's ROI is huge, and that level of, pricing that I've mentioned is actually very cost competitive. Those cases are exactly as you say, where there is a lot of analysis being done, a lot of what if, and the iteration cost itself is very high. We estimate that for people in financial planning and analysis that do like a monthly review and other kind of reporting requirements, we can save over half of their update time. Because don't forget, ActiveGraf is also linked to the Excel in the other direction. So as soon as your forecast month becomes your actual month, you're done. There's no update of anything. Your presentation is already updated. So there's a lot of time involved in that. So our first target market are business leaders and their advisors. So business leaders, including CFOs and fractional CFOs, but also the people that they support, the business leaders that they support. So the CEO, the C-suite, the strategy folks, and so on. And their advisors, meaning consultants, bankers, and other advisors, management consulting. So that's group number one. We've gotten most traction currently and recently with our newest product, which is ActiveGraf 4.0 with the publishing and so on, with the kind of CFO, FP&A, more forward-minded kind of trusted advisors. The second space is sales. So think about sales teams. If any of your clients have large sales teams, their value proposition engagement with their clients is greatly added if they can answer a question immediately. In other words, they're selling some kind of service themselves, or they have a manufacturing facility and they're out with their customers, and the customer says, well, what kind of discount could I get if I increased my order by 1.5? Instead of we'll get back to you, live board, change assumption, boom, right there. So that whole sales team, and within sales leadership and sales teams, we're focusing on technical sales teams, teams that have a value proposition that isn't just widget times price. It's something that's a little bit more involved.
Right.
And the last area that we're working very closely with data analytics practices. So analytics folks, especially the business development folks there. We just did an analysis where there was a predictive model for microbial load for the fastest growing, largest restaurant chain, fast food restaurant chain in America that I can't mention. They had a very sophisticated predictive model on when the lettuce comes in, how do we keep it from having a microbial load that's too high to keep people safe, right?
Right.
So there are a lot of different applications for Active.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Food safety. I mean, really, anything that you can quantify, you can make an Excel sheet about.
Exactly.
Anything you can make an Excel sheet about, you can graph and give people the tools to manipulate and see how it changes. Yeah.
And cool. I think one thing that we haven't talked about is the level of engagement with management and others is huge when you can separate the person who built the model from the people that can do what ifs on it. So by democratizing that product, you make a product in itself where this dashboard can be useful to almost everybody in an organization. For instance, when you're planning something. But in a traditional sense, the only person that can really iterate a model to update it and do any what ifs on it is the person who built it. ActiveGraf alleviates that problem. So it makes the whole organization more effective by allowing anybody to run what if scenarios on stuff.
Yeah, that's a real problem. I know I have sold countless number of spreadsheets to customers who need it to calculate crazy stuff like viral load or microbial load, but they inevitably have to call me back, because they didn't build the spreadsheet, and so even though I really try hard to make it dead simple, they didn't put it together. They can't trace the precedents back to find the variable that caused this change. And so they'll call me back and just say, can you recalculate this whole thing with a debt tenor of 15 years and a cost of equity of 35%, please? And of course, I find that to be simple, but having something like this layered on top would make it simple.
With us is this simple. I'm going to share the link with you right now I'll put it in the chat. You can also share it with your viewers.
Great.
And that is this use case that we're using right here.
Yeah.
So you can click on that and use it for yourself right now, just by clicking through.
All right. Very fun. Well, thank you for that demonstration. What a powerful tool you've built. I'm
Thank
going
you very
to
much.
close this down, and don't go away, Laszlo. But let me just say thanks
Absolutely.
everybody for watching. Laszlo Balassy with ActiveGraf, founder and CEO. You can look him up at activegraf.com, ActiveGraf.com. Still got your business card, so hope that's still correct.
Yep,
And,
absolutely.
all right. Thank you very much. We'll see you everybody next time.
Thank you, everyone.